Hello, and welcome to our first episode of Water Solutions for a Warming World. On behalf of the Arizona Institutes for Resilience, the Office of Research, Innovation, and Impact at the University of Arizona, and our co-sponsors, the Water Resources Research Center and the Udall Center for Studies in Public Policy, I'd like to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Kathy Jacobs, and I am the director of the Center for Climate Adaptation, Science and Solutions. We are very happy to have a large audience here today to talk about regional water sustainability. This is an opportunity for all of us to explore together a range of different perspectives on that topic. We have almost 500 people signed up for this today. I don't know how many will actually join. But we're really happy that there are so many people who would like to be part of this conversation. Before we get started, here are a few Zoom tips for our viewers. First of all, please use the question and answer area at the bottom of your Zoom window to submit any questions for the panelists. The question and answer session will be at the end of the episode. We will try to choose a broad cross-section of questions. We have already incorporated your questions into the focus of our conversation for today, so the ones that you already submitted are part of the program. This episode is being recorded and will be posted on the Arizona Institutes for Resilience website, which can be found in the chat. It probably won't be available until Monday of next week. We hope to learn about what works and what doesn't with this format. So we're going to be sending you a follow-up survey at the end. We're very anxious to improve and learn. So please do give us feedback if you wouldn't mind when that form comes out to you. I'm going to just give a little bit of background before we turn to our very impressive panelists for today. First of all, the Arizona Institutes for Resilience was formed about a year ago, combining 11 pre-existing environmental programs and projects that were previously under the Vice President for Research. Within the Arizona Institutes for Resilience, which we call AIR, we are looking to increase the university's capacity to solve real-world problems and build off-campus partnerships with the private and public sectors. We're committed to working with you to identify solutions and brainstorm new ideas. We're so happy to welcome you to this conversation today, the beginning of a series of 6 events to open a dialogue around these issues. We'll be having these events for the next 2 months and then 3 more of them in the fall. Water issues are very personal to people, and this is something that I think most people are aware of. We all have a relationship ourselves with the topic of water and water availability. There are many legitimate differences of opinion about water and water management, and that is an incredibly important thing to recognize because there's so much emotion around these topics. That being said, because scientific understanding does evolve over time, even facts as we know them can evolve. So we need to discuss these issues with a great deal of humility. We also need to understand that people see the concept of sustainability very differently. Many people see it as essentially the sweet spot between people, planet, and prosperity. I mean, that is one way to look at it. But we have to recognize that everyone comes at this topic from a different cultural background, with different personal experience. And then when they talk about this topic, they often look at it from very different scales. For example, if you're trying to solve a problem that's really happening today, and you need a short-term solution, it's a very different thing than if you're trying to provide a solution that works for your generation and multiple generations to come. It's also a whole lot easier to solve sustainability problems on small scales than to do it on multiple scales, where it works both at the local, state, regional, national, international scales so everyone is part of the sustainability components. If you're, for example, you're going to be importing water supplies from the Colorado River, is that a renewable water supply if there is no water reaching the Gulf of California anymore? What is a renewable water supply? A very personal issue. And then the next topic we want to address is really, what is the role of universities in helping to solve these problems? We at the University of Arizona have a very large investment in water-related capacity, whether it's the faculty, the staff, the research that's going on at the university. And we're really focused on credible, timely, and useful science that can help support decisions. This isn't the easiest thing to do within academia, but we are really committed to trying to make that happen. And we need your help to make that happen. We have framed the discussion that we are having today around your questions, as I mentioned before. But before we actually start setting the foundation, I wanted to acknowledge Jim Shuttleworth, who was a very influential person at the University of Arizona, Regents professor. He passed away this last December. He played a major role in understanding how the water cycle relates to climate change and made a lot of contributions both at the University of Arizona and around the world in understanding how the water cycle drives the impacts of climate change and vice versa. This event is the kickoff of a campaign to fund a scholarship for students in the Department of Hydrology and Atmospheric Sciences in his name. We welcome his friends, colleagues, and students to support this campaign in his honor. There's more about his life, his family, and a video about his contributions in the link in the chat, so feel free to take a look at that. So I'm now going to introduce the panel members, and as I introduce them, they'll be turning on their cameras. So first, I'd like to introduce Chairman Timothy Williams of the Fort Mojave Indian Tribe. We are incredibly grateful that you've chosen to join us today. It's a big honor for us that you're here. Timothy Williams has been the chairman for the last 14 years. He was a sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps. He's currently a doctoral candidate at the University of Southern California. Our next panelist is Roberto Salone, former commissioner from Mexico of the International Boundary and Water Commission. He stepped down in 2020. He's a great friend of many of us. He was the Northwest Regional Manager of the National Water Commission from 2002 to 2006, and until 2008 was General Manager of the Northwest Basin Unit in Hermosillo, Sonora. Dr. Catherine Sorenson is the former director of the City of Phoenix's Water Department. She is currently the Director of Research at the Udall Center for Water Policy at the Morrison Institute. She served for many years as the Director of the Phoenix Water Services, and has also been the Director of the City of Mesa's Water Resources Department. In those roles, she significantly advanced the sustainable management of water resources in Arizona and across the Colorado River Basin. Tim Tamior is both the director of the City of Tucson Water Department and currently an assistant city manager because he apparently didn't have enough to do. He is a water professional with 21 years of work experience in the public sector, private industry, and consulting. And in addition to all that, he is pursuing a PhD in geography in the School of Geography Development and Environment at the University of Arizona. Haley Paul is with Audubon Southwest. She's policy director at the National Audubon Society in Arizona. She joined Audubon in May of 2018. In her role as policy director, she works with stakeholders and decision makers in Arizona, as well as Audubon advocates to advance water and natural resource policy for people and birds. Prior to Audubon, Haley worked for the town of Gilbert Water Department and led the water conservation team. And last but definitely not least is Dr. Sharon Megdal, Director of the Water Resources Research Center and Professor in Environmental Science. She has an endowed chair and is Distinguished Outreach Professor at the university. Her work focuses on water policy and management. First of all, I just want to thank all of you for joining us. You are an incredibly impressive bunch, and we are expecting you to say a lot of very smart things. No pressure. So I'm going to just set up a little bit of background in response to questions that we received, just so we have a common foundation for this conversation. As I have discovered in my career, it's pretty important to try to get to some kind of foundation of shared facts. And so that's our objective here. This will be very quick, I promise. So the first point I wanted to make is the importance of context in water management. It's very easy to get parochial, but we share the Colorado River with 7 basin states and the country of Mexico. And so we cannot solve water problems related to the Colorado River by ourselves. We have to have partnerships, and we need to have relationships. And we need to understand a lot more than most people really can in their lifetime about supply and demand, reliability of CAP water. And then within Arizona, we need to think perhaps more about, do we want to protect more than just the central parts of the state? Next slide, please. The Arizona Groundwater Management Act focuses almost all of its efforts on the colored areas on this slide. So the 5 active management areas and the 3 irrigation non-expansion areas, or INAs, are the only places where the Groundwater Management Act really provides a lot of regulatory tools. Those are also the areas where the majority of the renewable supplies are available. But the 1980 Groundwater Management Act set up a whole system about groundwater rights. It supported the completion of the Central Arizona project. This act actually requires that you cannot develop new subdivisions without 100 years of renewable water supplies to support those subdivisions. And there are enforceable conservation requirements in every one of the active management areas. Most people don't actually know that, in part because many of the conservation requirements have been met, and so there's not a lot of controversy. And the Central Arizona project has been doing its job and bringing a lot of renewable supplies into the basin. So a lot of the conversations that were very visible in the 1980s and 1990s are not quite as obvious now, which is why it's worth mentioning this. Next. So we also wanted to make sure people have a picture of both the water supply and water demand situation in Arizona. We have 4 major sources of supply. About 36% for the entire state comes from the Colorado River, 40% from groundwater, 21% from in-state rivers like the Salt River, and 3%, a very small amount, from reclaimed water. The total water use in Arizona is about 7 million acre feet. And just for context, an acre foot is the size of a football field, 1 foot deep, filled with water, or for those of you who are mathematicians, 325,851 gallons. The average per capita water use is 120 in Arizona, and that's the residential per capita use. And then there are more than 22 million people who could be supported by 7 million acre feet at 120 gallons per capita per day. I was never good at math, but that's what I think the answer is. It's not clear that anyone would want 22 million people in this state, but if you didn't have agriculture or industrial use, you could, in fact, serve that many people, just for context. So agriculture uses 73% of the water in the state. municipal 21%, and industrial 5%. Next. I think it's important to note what a dramatic contribution the Central Arizona Project has made, at least within the Phoenix, Pinal, and Tucson active management areas. This is essentially showing what the overdraft rate is in the Tucson AMA. And as you can see, there was rapid decline in water levels up until the early 2000s, when we started using more and more Central Arizona Project water and storing more of it underground. And if normal CAP delivery were to happen into the future, this graph goes through 2040, I think we would be in quite good shape, because you can see the water levels would continue to increase. And we don't know yet, but it does appear that there will be impacts on CAP deliveries as a result of shortages on the Colorado River. So it's important to note a huge amount of progress has been made. There is some doubt about exactly how reliable the Central Arizona Project will be into the future. We can talk about that more. Next. And then my final, I think this is my final slide. And then really important point is what's going on outside the active management areas and the irrigation non-expansion areas. 20% of the population of the state is outside of these AMAs, nearly 1.5 million people, and continuing to grow. 31 of the 46 basins rely on groundwater for more than 75% of their use. Some communities are entirely reliant on groundwater. Agricultural production is increasing in specific parts of the state outside the AMAs. And of course, we're all facing this ongoing drought. So all of those things are challenges for our path forward towards sustainability. I'd now like to ask Catherine Sorenson to jump in and give her perspective on regional water sustainability. We have several of our panelists. We're going to give about a 5-minute overview of their perspectives, and I asked them to be provocative. We'll see how good they are at that. And then we'll have other panelists responding to them after that. So Catherine, take it away.
Sure, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really very pleased to be here. Kathy, I wanted to thank you very much for including the Kyle Center for Water Policy at Arizona State University in this important conversation. I hope this is the first of many collaborations between our universities. Now that I'm at ASU, I'm very excited about that. So this is a panel on regional water sustainability. So I thought a little while on what regional means and on what water sustainability means. And for purposes of this discussion, the Colorado River Basin is our region, as Kathy explained. And that is the context in which we can think about sustainability. We're all citizens of this basin or use water from this basin. And then, of course, there are connections between the Colorado River Basin and the basins adjacent to us. So really, our region quickly expands to include most of the Western United States. And to get the ball rolling, I thought I would throw out a concept of water sustainability, maybe as a point of reflection and possibly debate. I was thinking that water sustainability means stewarding water wisely now for potable, industrial, and agricultural uses, and of course for natural areas, in a fair and equitable manner that does not foreclose opportunities for future generations to also support public health, economic opportunity, and quality of life. Unfortunately, right now, we're not living within the means of the Colorado River Basin. I think it's very well known that the river basin is over-allocated. To make matters worse, scientists are telling us that the whole basin is becoming more arid and that we can expect the flows of the river to decline, perhaps very significantly in the future. This is really an enormous challenge to water sustainability in our region. And as Kathy mentioned, in some areas of our state, Arizona, We're draining fossil aquifers with really no means to ever recharge them. To add to all this, in terms of solutions, we've really already picked most of the low-hanging fruit. What's left in terms of a solution set are the things that are more expensive, more technically challenging, and of course, more politically difficult. I think there are very few win-win solutions left. Instead, we're really looking at more a set of difficult trade-offs and kind of least worst compromises. But that is our solution set. We have to get to work. Water is too important to our daily lives, to the natural environment, to our economies, for us to fail. So I think some of the things that we need to do looking to the future in terms of water sustainability in our region, certainly we need to continue our increases in efficiency. We've done a good job in this regard. Kathy talked about that a little bit earlier. Water use per capita has fallen across the state. We use as a state approximately the same amount of water as we did back in the 1950s, but we've added, I don't know, something like 6 million people to our population since that time. That's impressive and that's great, but we need to continue to do more and become more and more efficient with our water use. We need to be more innovative in our markets and exchanges, find those few win-win situations if they still exist. We need to invest more responsibly in infrastructure, the infrastructure that helps build resiliency for shocks, but also aging infrastructure, which is a huge challenge across the state and so important for public health. We need to take better care of our fossil aquifers. That's a huge challenge for us in rural Arizona. Increase our use of reclaimed water. And I would also add, develop additional surface water storage for flashier precipitation events. One of the things that may occur in the future is precipitation may be less overall, which is very problematic, but when it does come, it may come in flashier or larger events. We need to be prepared to respond to those events and capture as much water as we can when it does come. And of course, we need to continue to find new ways to collaborate across sectors. Here again, I think we've, as a state, done well. We've had some difficult times collaborating, some difficult conversations, but we've always been able to come to the table and work things out. And I think that has forged relationships across our state that can serve us, very well looking to the future. The challenge before us really is to provide certainty and enhance resiliency in our water systems in the face of social systems, a climate and politics really that are all becoming more and more volatile. It's a pretty tall order. As always, I'm an optimist, but I think part of optimism is understanding the challenges before you in a very factual and scientific way, so that they can be addressed and overcome. I think I'll stop there and look forward to what the other panelists have to say.
Great, thank you very much, Catherine. That was wonderful. Chairman Williams, we're very anxious to hear your perspective on all this.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to come in and speak this afternoon. But I come from a perspective of being over here on the Colorado River, Fort Mojave. I've also served as the 10 Tribes chairman. That includes the Ute, Mountain Ute tribe, also Hickory Apache Navajo Nation, Quechan tribe, Kokapa tribe, Chemehuevi tribe, Colorado River Indian tribes. And it has definitely been an experience over the past 14 years that I've been serving in office, and I think the biggest thing that has changed over the course of time is the inclusion, and that's where I think tribes and the sustainability that will take place in the future will be included, because those 10 tribes on the Colorado River have 20% allocated to them. Many of us are senior water rights holders also, and we're right above Lake Havasu area and right above CAP. So plenty of our unused water goes down into that area. So it's extremely important to begin to have those discussions. But there's been a history from the 2007 guidelines and moving on into the to the new guidelines, and then the drought contingency plan. I know Commissioner Solone's going to talk about some of the Mexico agreements that have taken place. All of this work has been done throughout the last couple of years, and it's been amazing to watch and to see, but also to know that throughout time, and our voices are being heard more and more, especially the tribal water study that was conducted. I know that was extremely important to us. And if somebody's out there is really wondering what the tribes are thinking, you could go to table 9D table 9A in that document under the tribal water study, and you're going to be able to see a lot of the discussion that's taken place over that time. And so that was extremely important to have. There's the strategic plans that we've been able to put in place, and creating those forums in order to ensure our voices are heard, because we always throw out this scenario: what if the tribes used all of their unused water? What would happen to the balance throughout the region and throughout the much metropolitan areas and everywhere else? I'll give you an example. Right here in Fort Mojave, if we used all of our unused water right now, but there's also a lot of the programs in place that it requires you to have used water in order to use some of those programs. So I know there's been, like we talked about, a lot of different management techniques and things like that, but those are the types of discussions I think Catherine was possibly, we could see some of those opportunities, and we could start to touch base, because there are those tribes out there. Now that I'm stepping back, and I feel I'm kind of younger but older in being a tribal leader for quite some time, but being able to see the connections. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, there with tribes, and also with others that have similar goals as the tribes do. And it's going to be interesting to see how this 2026 guidelines are formulated, and what the forums that are going to be created in order to ensure that those that have similar goals in hand, they're able to meet one another, and they're able to have those discussions, and they're really able to sit down. So we were extremely excited and proud of our new Secretary of Interior, Deb Helen. That was something else for us to be able to see as Indian people, and knowing and understanding her history and her contributions, not only to her tribe, but also to the country. And we look forward to continuing our work with her in the future. So I'd like to just leave you with that for right now, and look forward to our discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Williams. That was a great perspective. I'd like to ask Dr. Megdal to jump in and give us some thoughts.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Kathy, for the opportunity. You asked us to define sustainability, or what it means to us. And in a way, it can be simple to define, but it's actually very hard, I think, for us to grasp what it means. And I just wanted to share a definition I came up with in an interview about 18 months ago on environmental sustainability. And I just kind of blurted this out. And so I asked for the transcript so I could go back to what I said. And what I said was, environmental sustainability is figuring out how people can coexist with the natural environment, broadly construed. We need to preserve our natural resources just as we are preserving our quality of life in other ways. This means avoiding degradation and reversing degradation to the extent possible. So I'm going to just throw that out there for us to keep in mind. I kind of like this idea of coexistence in many different ways. But what I thought I would talk a bit about is a context for thinking about these problems and challenges in the region that maybe helps us realize that we shouldn't get frustrated when we're not coming up with the solution right away. And the concept is the concept of wicked problems, and particularly wicked water problems, where they're not easily solved. And so what you do is you identify the pathways to solutions and you continue to adapt. So that list of opportunities that Catherine pointed out, those are elements of the pathways to solutions. And there are a number of reasons for that that may come into play different ways at different times in different places. It could be incomplete or contradictory knowledge, the number of people and opinions involved, figuring out how to spread large economic burdens. And sometimes it could be the interconnected nature of these problems with other problems, such as poverty, geopolitical issues. And so what I think is important to keep in mind is that these problems are not solved and you're done with it. They can be mitigated and you make improvements to it. Interdisciplinary collaborations are necessary. That's where a lot of us at the university can come in, working with the practitioners and officials. And so it's a new kind of work. And I speak about water management in the Colorado River Basin quite a bit. And I speak about some of the issues we're dealing with in the context of wicked water problems. And the examples that I often give are the imbalance of water demand and supply in the Colorado River Basin. I mean, that is a huge issue that we have to deal with. And we'll probably be dealing with that forever. Groundwater overdraft and invisibility. Catherine mentioned fossil groundwater. We can't see it. We often don't know how much is there. We're using it up. And how do you figure out what to do about that? The lack of attention to water for nature, environmental flows. Kathy, you mentioned water not getting down to the Delta, one example that we really have not grappled with particularly well in the arid Southwest. And we're looking at ways to improve, but solving the problem will be very difficult. And the last example I often talk about is the lack of water and water infrastructure. And that's become known to the country and the world in the context of the pandemic, the Navajo Nation. There are issues of not having water rights quantified, but even when they are quantified, there may not be the infrastructure to deliver them. And you might think, well, we can solve that with a lot of money, and maybe you can, but I give it as an example of a wicked water problem. So I think I'll stop with that, Kathy, and look forward to the additional discussion and questions.
Great. Well, thank you all for helping to set the stage. I'm now going to see if Commissioner Salone is willing to jump in, and I think we're going to sort of open this up into more of a conversation. So Roberto, you ready to go?
Yes, I would like to thank you also, Kathy, for inviting me to be here. It's really a pleasure to share this panel with all these very knowledgeable people of water problems. And as Chairman Williams mentioned a while ago, we were involved in this Colorado River problems as a country, Mexico, since 2008. When we started to see that the Colorado River was immersed in this very long period of drought since the year 2000. And we were very concerned about the complexity of the problems of the lack of water. And one thing that I like to mention as a starter is that there are very many issues that we don't understand. we don't understand, we didn't understand the nature of the drought until that seminal article published by Dr. Udall and Auerbach, I think was the other one, when they explained that it was a drought caused by temperature, not by the lack of snowfall or rain, and then we started to understand what was happening in the basin, and it was affecting, as well as the U.S., it was affecting Mexico. In 2012, we signed Minute 319, which gave some order to the treaty, 1944 treaty, because the treaty didn't explicitly say when we were going to have shortages of water. So Minute 319 sort of put in writing when the levels of Lake Mead, we're going to go down, then we're going to take some shortages. It didn't happen. Anything didn't happen in 5 years. So we had to go to Minute 323, which is now in effect. So this is very complex, a very complex situation. And I don't think we are there yet. So there are more things that we need to understand, to study. Okay.
Great, thank you very much. You're absolutely right. There's enormous complexity. And of course, the international border makes things even more challenging. Haley, do you want to jump in?
Sure, thanks. I think I wanted to start by saying that, Arizona water management really needs to transition away from the legacy models of ecosystem degradation, as some of us mentioned, exclusion and unsustainable extraction, and toward these new models of sustainability and inclusion, particularly in light of climate change. And so a couple of the questions on the registration page for this event: what does water sustainability look like? And what are the paths forward to more inclusive solutions? I think from where I sit and the work that I do on the side of the birds and the environment, that to answer that, we need to level set a bit with the fact that we're working within a system of water management that was built from exclusion of certain people and exclusion of the environment. And so we're operating within a system that used exclusion to establish a legal framework that then justified control over natural resources. And it was fueled by our colonialist ambitions to expand the US and benefit Euro-American settlers. That's to say, we forcibly moved indigenous people from their homelands and then excluded them from access to the early infrastructure, both physical and policy, of our developing West. And so we see the ramifications of this today with the fact, as Sharon alluded to, that not all Arizonans have access to clean drinking water in our state. So in addition to the exclusion of people, our water management system it also excludes the environment for the most part. And so I think we just need to be clear about the legacy systems that we're operating within, because it allows us to then have that conversation about how do we reconcile, innovate, and improve them. I think it's important to name the causes of the situation we are in, not to say we have to tear it all down, but to recognize that in order to make progress, we must innovate within a system that was originally designed to exclude the needs of some for the benefits of others. If we can agree that that is true, I think it allows us to acknowledge that there are improvements that must be made for people's livelihoods in communities where water supplies are at risk, or where water access is not universal, and for the habitat and wildlife that depend on reliable water supplies. So that's where I'd like to take my conversation. Thanks.
Go, Haley. Okay, Tim, you're up.
Well, good afternoon, and I add my thanks to being able to join this panel and this discussion. And so in reflecting on the comments that came before, some of the things I would just like to add to the mix are, one is that one of the things we're observing and you have to embrace in order to really achieve sustainability and move that into the future is that at the same time as our challenges are evolving, so are our solutions. So we've made progress in a lot of areas, some great progress in the area of conservation efficiency, as Catherine pointed out, total water use being something like in the 1950s in the Tucson area, even on that graph that you showed, Kathy, at the beginning, where you showed the overdraft and you showed 1985, Tucson, in the Tucson water service area, we're back to water use of 1985. And the water we use is totally different. It's no longer solely groundwater. In fact, groundwater is like the least supply that we use on an annual basis. But layered upon any of these triumphs, Groundwater Management Act, assured water supply, conservation, importation, is the fact that the bar of sustainability is moving with the projected and already being observed impacts of climate change. So wrestling with that whole system, and the past can be important. The past can give us some lessons learned, but the past is not the predictor of the future, and we have to really work together to understand that all the goalposts are moving while we're trying to do what we do now even better. And so it's that work is ongoing. We're never going to be there in the water space, but can we keep moving together regionally into a better and more resilient place, and also continue to make the investments necessary? That doesn't necessarily mean importation of water. That's just one potential thing. It could be any number of these strategies that need to evolve at the same time as the problems are evolving. So that's really what I wanted to add at this point, is that both of those things are moving at the same time.
Great. Well, I think you've all put a lot of ideas on the table, both in terms of defining our challenges and in terms of what looks like solutions. I'd like to see if any of you would like to respond to anything that you heard each other say. And while you're thinking about what you would do if I asked you that, I just want to remind people that we are taking questions in the question and answer part of the screen. We have a number of questions already, and we will start asking and answering those soon. But I did want the panelists to have an opportunity to talk with each other, challenge each other's ideas, follow up on things that have just been said. Yes, Tim.
So I would like to just really share with the group. I think there's a general awareness about some activities going on in the solution space, but wanted to highlight the Governor's Water Council, mostly because there's a number of subcommittees that are working on challenges and solutions. But there's one particular conversation that's actually going to happen on Friday where the post-2025 AMAs subcommittee, which is actually a group that's been looking at water management inside the active management areas, which Kathy showed on a map, which is not the be-all, end-all of regional challenges, but it's certainly an area where we've had past challenges, we've had a lot of success, but we haven't gotten there yet, whatever there means. And there's 6 issue papers that will be brought forward to the full council to say, here's where this group of about 100 water interests around the state think the conversation needs to go over the next few years. And that's just 6 issue briefs in that AMA area, let alone all the Colorado River negotiations that are in reconsultation and all that. So there's already work ongoing, and is a great time to inject your voice into the process, because all of this webinar is a great example. But these committees are much more open, transparent, and inclusive than they used to be. So my call to action is take advantage of that and plug in.
Great, thanks, Tim. Others who want to jump in and comment or reflect on what any of the other panelists have said.
Just comment on Tim's comment, and it's extremely important because there are so many different moving parts. I think that's a big part of this, is there's different moving parts. The Governor's Water Council and tribes meeting in different places, but there's so many different moving parts that it would be nice, I think, in this, and when we come and look at solutions for the future, to have those designated areas where time is well spent. Time is extremely precious for everybody. and being able to go to a forum where you know those comments are going to be included, and not a committee after committee, or subgroup after subgroup, but really coming to the table to know that those will be inputted in the final solution, I think is important also. But just wanted to reflect on that as Tim was discussing that. I was thinking about how many different organizations are out there, and those that are here at the university and others, they are extremely good resources to be able to know where those good conversations are going to be taking place. So thank you.
Great. Sharon?
Yes, thank you, Kathy. Chairman Williams, I was trying to think about how to smartly articulate a question of you regarding this issue of process and involvement and inclusion. In that, we show the map. I wanted to mention that I teach a class in water policy. I give a lot of talks, and I, like Kathy, talk about the importance of context. And geographic context is very important. And I'll show a map of the basin with the 7 states in Mexico, but then I'll also show both a map of Arizona showing the tribal nations, and also the cover map from the 10 Tribes Partnership Study. And as you know, tribal nations cross state boundaries. And we tend to do all this work in the context of states. And I just wonder if you had any thoughts to share or insights about how to kind of overcome this maybe over-focus on the states. Some of the state people wouldn't like me saying that, but to have tribes at the signature events and things like that. Any insights you'd like to share on that?
I'll give an example here. And that question goes right on our reservation. We have lands in Arizona, California, and Nevada. And so we actually had to pay back some water in California when we're over allocated in Arizona. And then using some of our water in Nevada, we're right up to the brim on that. And so having that ability, and this is where we come to solutions, us being having the ability to be able to use our water. Again, this is Fort Mojave Indian Tribe water, but we still fall under the state rules where we can't use our over allocated or our extra water in Arizona over on our California farms. And we farm in the California, we have olives over there, we have alfalfa over there, and same thing over there on the Arizona side. We have alfalfa, and we begin seeing one of the questions. I don't mean to answer it, Kathy, ahead of time, but working to move to pivot irrigation more so than flood irrigation in order to have that conservation efforts on our parts, and seeing the infrastructure and what needs to take place. So, but definitely, if some of those barriers were broken down, I think it would definitely help us out in the future when it comes to the sustainability of it overall.
I'm surprised that no one yet has responded to Haley's point about structural exclusion. Is that something anyone else would like to talk about more?
Kathy, if I could, I just want to note that this whole question of who's involved in the dialogues, and to Tim's point about inviting participation, that is a big issue. We're starting a project at the Water Center, diversifying voices in water resources. There are so many voices that aren't heard for many different kinds of reasons. And it's a huge issue. But it's also, I think it was Chairman Williams saying, we're all very busy. And so how do you plug in, and how do you figure out how to contribute your voice and your perspective? It's a bit overwhelming. And so I don't have an answer to it, but I think Haley brought up a very, very important point.
Right. Catherine?
I think it's also important to keep in context that much of what we need to do looking forward into the future revolves around inclusion, not just in terms of what groups are at the table, but put into context that people keep moving to Arizona. It's a great place to live. It's a high quality of life. And we don't turn people away. We're a free country. We want people to come and enjoy our quality of life and be part of our economic engine. And part of our water solutions, really looking forward into the future, are about making sure that no matter who you are, what your circumstances are, where you come from, if you live in our communities, you will have access to safe, clean, reliable water supplies. So I think inclusion is very much an important part of water sustainability, looking forward into the future in Arizona. I think there's much we have done. There's still a long way to go, but more and more people will continue to come here, and we have to be sure that we provide for everyone who does.
Great, thanks. Commissioner Salmon, did you want to jump in on anything your colleagues have said?
I've always said that to solve these problems, we need to be more creative and more innovative. And that's Catherine mentioned something like that in her intervention. And I also want to stress or underline that we need more investment in research. And you are at universities, and I haven't heard you talking about the lack of research. In order to know more about these problems, in order to go more deeper into what is happening and what are those innovative and creative solutions or actions that we need to take in order to, I don't know, survive or live through this drought period. In 2008, I was looking at one of the studies with the tree rings of the Colorado River for about 1,000 years or something like that. And I saw that there were periods of drought of 30 years. And I said, oh, that's a long time of drought. And we're in the 21st year of this long drought. So we are approaching a 30-year drought maybe. And I don't see us, and I mean Mexico and the US, doing things to really survive this. I mean, we're looking for solutions to keep doing the same things that we have done for the past 50 years. So I don't see anything new in the future. And those things, those new things are gonna come from universities, from research centers that are providing the population, the general public, the government, industries and businesses with different solutions to a very complex problem. So I think we should be focusing on those things and make sure that we are not trying just to preserve the status quo.
Great, that's music to our ears. Thank you. Tim or Haley, do you want to jump in?
I was just going to say that, like in Catherine mentioning just the challenges early on, and then Commissioner Salmon with his, we can't do it like we've done it in the past. I think that's essential. And I worry that we see the challenge, we see a different road ahead, but we're kind of doing the same things as we've always done, or we're innovating within the same line of thinking. And I do agree that innovation is really necessary. And I think of the remarkable story of the 2014 pulse flow through Mexico, where the dry Colorado River met the Gulf of California, and just the innovation and thinking that took, and then the precedent setting that allowed for us to then think more about the environment in the context of Colorado River negotiations. So agree and hope to see more. And I think we need to do more, and we need to not dance around the fact that we have really big problems and not be scared to say them out loud. I think we're sometimes scared to say them out loud.
Tim, do you want to come after any of these ideas?
Sure. I mean, I would agree that there's been there's an ongoing debate. It's probably been going on for years about what's the value of incremental change versus the value of kind of a foundational shift. And I guess I approach it from the standpoint as there's times for both. because you can definitely stitch together a timeline that supports the incremental approach to this, that as the challenges got bigger or different or the situation changed, we found a way. What I would say is, there was but how much further down the timeline did our solutions get us? So I'll use, for example, the DCP, drought contingency plans. They basically got us 6 years, depending on your perspective, of some level of assurance. And it took at least in Arizona, it took 3 different attempts, one that was completely exclusive, and then ultimately the one that was very inclusive is the one that yielded a result. Quick little side story. There was a meeting about this issue that Catherine, the director of Phoenix Water, and Tim, the director of Tucson Water, we had to get ourselves invited as staff of people who sat on the council. So in the meeting, I was a staff member of Tucson Electric Power who had a seat at the table, and Catherine was a staff member of the mayor of City of Scottsdale. That's how we could get into the room where the discussion was happening. That did not work. It did not go anywhere. Then ultimately we got the steering committee, the DCP, Arizona DCP steering committee. To our credit, we've now trying to keep that model going into reconsultation. So where was I going with that? What I was trying to convey is there's I think an opportunity for both levels of discussion. You can continue to get some time gained and some progress made incrementally. And then when is the time where a foundational shift needs to occur? And then kind of to Haley's point, the pulse flow, other things like the multi-species conservation plan in the Colorado, these were like impossible things that then once they were done, they unlocked all this thought. And I would chalk them up to some degree of incremental thing that resulted in a foundational shift. So, how do you have the conversation that results in the change you need? And what I would argue is let's not get caught up on what type of a change is this. Let's let the conversation flow so that we can get to some better solutions.
Tim, in the context of that, I'm just wondering what you think about the possibility of doing both simultaneously. In other words, that you have long-term strategic and sort of really groundbreaking kinds of conversations while you're sort of doing short-term negotiations about the next 6 years or the next 20 years. Is that possible, or will people have whiplash?
Well, it's a great question. And my input would be there's space for both and creating the right conditions for it. So I'm going to give you a shout out. The Colorado River Conversations process, which if people aren't familiar with, there's some published works coming out on that. But it was convening a group to really just, step out of your normal box, think about this as a basin, think about this long-term, think about this without constraints. That generated some work that can be used and useful. It also built relationships amongst these people that convened in a different way will be sitting around a table to negotiate something. So it's somewhat a role for academia can be to say, look, let's go transport ourselves into this space where we can have that foundational discussion and not have everybody immediately back away from the table saying, you're trying to take my water, or whatever the gut reaction might be. And I think it's often the same people, but more inclusive as we move forward.
Great.
Kathy,
So,
can I say
go
one
ahead,
thing
Sharon.
here? Just in terms of, I think to your question, the question is kind of how fast can things happen, and can you keep ahead of bad things happening, while you're figuring it out? And I just want to note that, and I tell people this, I wasn't always a water person, but now I've been a water person for a long time. And in the time I've been involved, I've seen significant change in the respect and collaboration between the US and Mexico on Colorado River issues at meetings like Colorado River Water Users. The 10 Tribes Partnership, just, it now is rotating and has the presidency of this organization and has a different standing. The NGOs, I use the example of the pulse flow as actually my environmental example of where things can be done, but that was a one-shot deal. How do you get that to continue? And so I think, a big question is kind of what's the time frame we're talking about? And again, I keep coming up with questions and I don't have an answer, and I'll leave it at that.
Well, I'm going to transition now. We have very large numbers of questions that have come in, and they're all excellent. And honestly, we could literally spend the entire time, the whole hour and a half on each one of them. And actually, I would love to do that. Not going to, but it would be fun. So the first one is one of my favorites, and it's, do rivers have a right to water, or should rivers have a right to water? And to me, that is a really fundamental question that goes to what Haley said at the beginning about what is the basic framing for the way we manage water. Anybody want to take, should rivers have a right to exist?
I'll speak for the rivers. No, I think that question was, I think I saw that early on, and it framed a lot of how I wanted to approach my opening, in that, no, we don't have specific rights for rivers. They're allocated to, agriculture, cities, tribes, which it can work is if we have flowing rivers and the way our systems work, and the next user gets their water and it goes down the line, and we encourage flowing rivers in that way. So I think it's, again, kind of that transformational or incremental. Right now, we're looking for incremental ways to get the environment at the table, get wins for the environment, recognizing much more needs done, but that right now, solutions could include, recycled water in river channels, as we've seen in Tucson. We think, managing our supplies in rural Arizona would protect rivers, because right now there's unrestricted groundwater pumping that often occurs along rivers. And then investment to protect our rivers and what we have right now. So no, they don't have a right now, but there's things we could certainly do to help them.
Anyone else want to jump? Oh, good. Let's go with Chairman Williams.
Thank you. Yeah, that question on the rivers have the right to exist is almost like saying for us as into people. And I think, Kathy, you in your opening talked about the different lenses that we look at the river. Here in Fort Mojave, from a traditional standpoint, we're people along the river. So when we ask that question, it's more along, do we have the people? Do we have the right to exist also? So we're connected one-on-one with the river. So it's a lot different than, simply a tangible item going by us. We actually live it from a spiritual standpoint, traditional standpoint. So we're really definitely connected to the river in that respect. So yes, the rivers have the right to exist, just as the members of the Fort Mojave Indian tribe have the right to exist. Thank you.
Tim?
A great point, Chairman Williams. And that's part of the impetus for some of the projects in Tucson, is to try to connect Tucsonans or reconnect them in a similar way in our urban context here. And so what I would say in response to Haley, or not necessarily in response to Haley, but to say a win for the environment does not necessarily need to mean some other sector loses. There are opportunities, and more opportunities to have the environment be a part of the solution, where the environment benefits and also good water management happens and good economic outcomes happen. And so, reuse has been mentioned, and I know in some of the questions there's some asking about rain and stormwater runoff. That's all part of this. And so green stormwater infrastructure or low impact development is another way where we can address maybe problems that are society's facing, but do it in a way that either creates an environmental benefit or uses the environment as part of the ecosystem services to create that outcome. And rethinking about what's a good investment of water. Traditionally we thought a good investment of water is into a factory that makes something that creates products to be sold. But a great investment of water, looking at it through 2021 eyes, is in a tree canopy in a part of the community where it adds to the quality of life, the environmental benefits, the mental and physical health and well-being of a community. So we need to continue that evolution and just continue to recognize that a win for the environment does not mean somebody else loses.
Catherine, do you have any ideas about how to get to that place from where we are today?
Wow, there's a question.
That's why I gave it to you.
Thanks. I was thinking about it as everyone was speaking. I agree broadly with what's been expressed, but I guess I look at it more in terms of outcomes. A river having a right within our existing legal system, our existing structure of managing water, maybe that works. Maybe it's a valuable tool. Maybe there are better ways to go about it. I think what matters are the outcomes, that we do find those places where what serves the people also serves the environment, also serves our economy. So I guess I look at it more broadly. How we get there, I think looking into the future, particularly on the Colorado River, it might surprise people that alliances are really they're gonna shift, and they're not maybe where you think they are. So people might think, for example, that urban residents in the city of Phoenix that don't care about the Colorado River flowing, it's not important to them. Well, they'd be just dead wrong on that. The most important thing for the city of Phoenix is certainty on the river. And that means water in the river. And that means a healthy ecosystem so that the water does flow down to the intakes and can become part of our portfolio. And looking forward, I think the alliances on the Colorado River will not be so much about states versus states, or Indian communities versus non-Indian communities, or agriculture versus cities, or anything like that. I think that you will see much more complexity in those relationships because we are so intertied. And so, for example, and Tim kind of alluded to this, when we were negotiating the drought contingency plan, actually, one of the strongest and most important relationships in the negotiations was between the cities of Tucson and Phoenix, the agricultural districts in Yuma, and the Gila River Indian community. We all had the same interests at heart, and we all worked together very collaboratively behind the scenes to bring things forward. So I think that you'll see some really surprising alliances when you look at the future of the Colorado River. And I think that we will continue to innovate and find those solutions that benefit all of us and the environment, no matter what the tool. I think there are many available. And I think we're really good at finding them and finding those solutions.
Great. Commissioner Salone?
I think this is a great question. It got me thinking a lot. And I think it's more like a philosophical question. I mean, does nature have a right to water? And because the river is part of habitat, and I can see that. I think that the sadder thing to see is a dry riverbed, and it really brings all these loneliness feelings, and yes, I think we should do something to bring water to the rivers, and that's what the NGOs, the coalition of NGOs in the Colorado River have been buying water rights, because there are no water rights available to put in the river. So they are buying water rights in Mexico so that they can put that water in the riverbed and do the restoration and do the environmental purposes, use that water. So I think, yes, we should do something about that.
So Kathy, I wasn't going to say anything, but I want to here. And that is that when it comes to the intrinsic value of water and rivers and nature, we don't have the kinds of studies that we have of the economic impact of industry A or B. And true, there are studies done on the value of this, but from my experience, those studies are not often believed by some people. The numbers aren't viewed as reliable by some people. And I just want to share that the example I talk about when I talk about wicked water problems is about the pulse flow. And when I have time, or even when I don't have time, I show the photo of the little girl that's 5 minutes and 35 seconds into the Robert Redford narrated movie about the pulse flow. A 5-year-old girl with a big smile on her face in the water in the river. And that's the value of water in the river. And rivers should have water in them, but it's very hard to put a dollar value, and still in many circles, dollars are what speak.
Yep.
You're telling me no one believes my study, Sharon?
They believe your studies, Haley. No, not yours excluded.
I'll just say $13.5 billion industry in the state, outdoor recreation along water. We tried to do that because we know that those arguments are out there.
And I wasn't referring to yours. I've been in international discussions where people question these things. So
Great. Well, I'm actually going to move to our second question out of roughly 70. This one is about the role really of facts in solutions. It says, we have a lot of very good information and have had good facts for years. They seldom seem to have resulted in helpful political action. Comments about more facts and more science leading to any better actions. This comes back really to the question of, do we need more research? Do we need more facts? Do we need more political will? What is it that we need to actually make some of these changes? Who wants to take that one first? Was that you? Were you waving, Kathy?
Yeah, I'll go. We need both. But in fairness, a lot of the solutions, the potential solutions that are out there, they're known. They're just really politically difficult, and they're expensive, and that's a huge hurdle. I noticed one of the other questions that one of the members of the audience asked was, well, if water is so important that we cannot fail, why is it so inexpensive? And I couldn't agree more. It's because finding the political will to raise the price of water is extremely difficult. Finding the political will to implement these solutions is extremely difficult. Absolutely. But I don't want to minimize the importance of additional research, particularly in the face of climate change. We do need to better understand what precipitation is going to look like as the basin aridifies. We need to know that at more local scales than what the current models show us. There's still a huge amount of research that needs to be done. The use of reclaimed water, the constituents that are in it, there's still a huge amount of research that is very, very important to our solution space, but absolutely political will is what we need.
I'm interested, Chairman Williams, in whether, I have no idea exactly how much interaction you've had with universities, and or whether there are questions that you think eggheads could be useful in answering, or whether, I guess what I'm asking is how can we be providing you with more culturally appropriate information?
Just having that and sharing that information. Another thing that happens over here with tribes is we from time to time we switch over in leadership positions, just like everywhere else. So sometimes those relationships are built with whether it be a region or a city or somebody, and it's a constant. We need to constantly be able to be consistent, I think, from the tribes and also from the universities and everybody else, to be able to consistently create that dialogue. That's one of the biggest things we worked on with the 10 tribes. As leadership positions change over and positions are made, can we and do we have the ability to be consistent so that we can create and build upon what's already done, what's already been created, instead of, you get a new, tribal leader. And imagine me back in 2007, come out of the Marine Corps, and I was fired up every meeting, and you're ready to go, and but it's a different environment when it comes to water. You definitely have to look at the different parties and everybody that's involved in this, because all of us are connected in one way, shape, or form when it comes to our water. So I think that was an important lesson to be able to understand. And just like everybody from a political standpoint, you want to do what's best for your community. But the difference for us is we're going to always live within our community. We'll never probably leave our community. I'll be put to rest someday when my time comes inside of this community, and others have the ability to leave, or they come in from out of state or different things like that. And so they make, they have their own ideas of what it is and what it could be. So I think that's just extremely important. I think the consistency all the way around, so that we build upon things instead of kind of creating the wheel. And Commissioner Salone said, just keep doing kind of the same status quo. We need to build upon what we know what we've already done. What can we do that's different, and what can we do that's going to be more sustainable for our water resources?
Great. I see we've been joined by the next generation. Would you like Haley to introduce the next generation to us?
Yes, sorry, he infiltrated. This is Eli.
Hi. Tim Tamur, I'm wondering whether you have a perspective on whether we need more facts and research in solving water problems, given that you're on both sides. You're on both teams here.
Yeah, as a practitioner and a trying to be academic, of course, I see the value in additional data, and I think it comes in multiple levels. In some cases, the data is necessary to be able to understand the problem. In some case, and or develop solutions. And in some cases, the data is necessary to overcome the presumption that there's not a problem. And so we're seeing this play out actively in some of the conversations going on now, because when you do have interest groups who want to embrace a particular perspective on water, whether it's availability, quality, whatever that is, sometimes only through really sufficient and robust data can you move the conversation forward from denial that there's a problem to acknowledgement and, okay, here's what the data tells us about the nature of the problem, how we can solve it. So that's definitely a need, and that need continues and grows. And then as a social scientist / engineer, I would say there's a whole social science aspect to that's active right now, but has been missing in the past. And that goes to the inclusion. It goes to thinking differently about robust solutions. And that's a place where academia can really add a lot of value, not just basic data that's collected or interpreted, but how to have a productive conversation, or how to really assess the framework or modifications to the framework and what those outcomes might be.
So while I have you on the spotlight, one of the questions that I hear almost every time I speak publicly is, what is the worst case scenario that we need to be prepared for in Tucson? And are we prepared for that? You have an answer for that question?
I do. I have a multifaceted answer to that question.
I bet you do.
So what my response is that, Tucson is in a really advantageous position compared to maybe some of our peers, or definitely compared to where we were 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So does that mean the work's done? By no means. What that means is the work needs to continue. So the conservation and efficiency programs that have brought total water use down, even though the community's been growing, the diversification of water supplies, protecting those water supplies, using those water supplies well, and pushing for needed changes to the institutional framework that allow us to use our water in the manner that provides the water management outcome along with the environmental benefit or the quality of life benefit we're looking for. So what is a worst case scenario for Tucson? So Tucson would not be able to survive in the long term without regular inputs from the Colorado River. That does not mean that Tucson, by definition, needs to have every year the full allocation delivered. That's where we have been. That's the state we're using right now because it's available, and then we store it for the future, or we do things with partnerships. But a worst case scenario, which I believe, demonstrate, given enough time, that Tucson's prepared for, is even a 50 or a 75% reduction to the CAP. I don't think the worst case scenario that we should be planning for is there's no CAP, because even in some of the more recent, the Utah State study, all these things that are coming out, that's not really the end game, is a zero CAP. It's maybe a significantly reduced CAP for an extended period of time, but that pain, which we already saw it getting shared differently than you would have going into DCP. California had no obligation. Now California has an obligation. So there's what that next reconsultation will result in is some framework that, in my opinion, results in a worst case scenario is not zero. Worst case scenario, maybe 25%, maybe 50% for an extended period of time. Under those scenarios, Tucson is perhaps uniquely positioned to have a continuous and reliable water supply throughout. There are consequences to making all the ends meet, but Tucson's in a very good position.
Great, thanks. That was a very, very complete answer. So I am desperately unhappy that we have not answered more of the questions that have come in, and it seems like there should be round 2 of this with the same people, but I know it's getting late and lots of people are not necessarily going to be amused by that. So we'll try to figure out how we can work towards answering more of these questions. Maybe it's a blog type thing. But in the meantime, I'd like to ask each of the panelists, what is the one thing that you would like to leave this audience with? And then we have some final wrap-up messages at the very end. I don't know if any of you are anxious to be first in line to answer that question. If you don't,
Hey, Kathy, I'll go first, okay, because you introduced me last, so I'll be last in, first out. And that is, and I'm going to give my 1 point as an answer to a question Bob Rashears put in about the Sulphur Springs Valley and what to do. And what the takeaway is that participate in these dialogues, participate in educational opportunities, because every one of you is a water stakeholder. Every one of you is a decision maker influencer. And the way to get the policies changed, such as the lack of groundwater regulations out in Cochise County, is by influencing your decision makers, that there's support for change. So I would say education, dialogue, and process. So those are my, I said 3 things, Kathy, sorry.
Who's counting? Okay, who's next? Catherine.
Sure, I'm going to stand on my infrastructure soapbox. We have to do a better job of investing in aging infrastructure across the state. So I hope that people become very vocal supporters of that investment and really put pressure on their elected officials to support the systems that provide public health in our communities.
Great, thank you. Haley?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just end with, I think that we need to fight the temptation to look for the next bucket of water while we still haven't done everything we can in-house in our own situation to protect the water supplies that we do have. And I'd say for some parts of Arizona, the worst case scenario is already here. They have a problem and they can't do anything about it. And we should fix that. So I'd say let's not get sidetracked by big things if without looking first at what we can do now to live within our limits.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Salone?
I'll say be aware, stay informed of how things are regarding the availability of water. I mean, if the hydrology of the basin doesn't change for the best, if the current 21-year drought lingers on, and if we don't change the way we do things, we will be feeling the stress of not having enough water in the future. I'll say think outside the box, be creative, be innovative, and last, invest in research. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Tim?
What I would add to it is the creativity, innovation is important. Flexibility is always going to be something that contributes to the creativity, contributes to the solutions. And in my case, I'd say that geography matters, and the solutions are not necessarily a one size fits all, nor are the challenges. So as Haley pointed out, parts of the region that are already in a crisis mode, and then there are parts of the region that may be, better positioned to withstand the near term. So really, you got to downscale. You got to understand what regional collaboration partnership looks like, but you got to downscale problem set and the solution that maybe regional partners would contribute to.
Great, thank you. And Chairman Williams, you get the last word prior to me.
All right, thank you. Last I'd leave everybody with is just to include the tribes in your thinking. And, sometimes where are they at? We're here. And I'd like to leave you with a visual is when they signed I believe the DCP 2019, there were the flags of the states and there were the representatives on the Hoover Dam. Imagine if we could have all the flags of the states, the federal government, and all of the tribes of the upper and lower basin and representatives of them there. I think that's when we're talking about sustainability, and that's when we're definitely talking about the inclusion. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks to all of you. That was an amazing amount of conversation and a great attempt to really answer the questions that came from our stakeholders. So very happy about all that. And thanks to those of you who joined us. We had well over 200 people. I don't know what the peak number was, but those of you who lasted till the very end get extra gold stars. We want to remind you all that we are going to be going to have 2 more of these this spring and 3 more in the fall. And then if you have an opportunity to go to this website and find out more about Jim Shuttleworth, we'd appreciate that. And then for the final one, just want to remind you, April 21st at 4 p.m., please do sign up. We have an amazing lineup. We have not one as we have today, but 2 tribal chairmen, as well as an amazing panel of other participants for this Water and COVID-19 in Indian Country event. So thank you all. Again, we are incredibly grateful, and I'm so grateful for the help from our amazing staff at the Arizona Institutes for Resilience. Thank you all. This has been a great kickoff event, and we look forward to more engagement with you. Feel free to send us comments anytime and put any comments you have in our feedback form. Thanks, and we'll talk to you soon, we hope. Bye, everybody.